She flaunted her CEO husband, not knowing I was the one who put him in that seat. I never spoke up. I never corrected the rumors. But there's one thing she didn't understand. In this world, some people don't need to raise their voice because they control the entire board. This story shook the financial world when a girl thought she had won it all only to destroy her own career with one post at the wrong time. It all started in Los Angeles, where a single glance can change your fate. And I decided this show has run long enough. It's time for the curtain to fall. My name is Eleanor Lancaster. Officially, I'm the creative director of a small independent fashion magazine, an understated publication focused on aesthetics and long-form storytelling. We don't chase trends, we don't fight for headlines. Much like me, the magazine moves quietly without need for noise. I live in a minimalist penthouse in Beverly Hills. I drive an unmarked electric car. I don't share my private life on social media. People assume I live simply because I have nothing to show. To most, I'm just the ex-wife of Dylan Walker, the rising tech CEO, whose company is preparing to go public. Dylan, the brilliant face of innovation. And me, supposedly the woman left behind. We don't attend events hand in hand. We don't post anniversary photos. We've never played the happy couple for the cameras. So as Dylan stepped into the spotlight, I quietly disappeared from the narrative, and the world made its assumptions. Then came Brittany, a social media darling, young and loud. She began posting cryptic captions and blurry photos carefully curated to suggest she and Dylan were together. The public believed her. The headlines followed. Still, I said nothing. I didn't deny it. I didn't correct her. Because when you're the one holding the board, you don't need to explain the moves. And here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just Dylan's wife. I was the one who gave him the very capital that built his empire. And the throne they're all fighting over, I'm the one who built it. Her name was Brittany Chase, a social media model famous for looking innocent but dangerous, and for her curated feed filled with blurry photos and cryptic flings with semi-famous men. I knew she had worked briefly as a temporary assistant at Dylan's office for a short-term project. 3 weeks, that's all it took. Enough time to plant rumors, take a few stolen pictures, and start crafting the narrative of a CEO and his assistant love story that she wrote, directed, and starred in. A photo of Dylan holding a glass, her fingers conveniently touching his. A grainy video in an elevator. Captions like, "Sometimes power is just one heartbeat away. He makes me feel safe in the chaos." Social media exploded. Tabloids ran wild. Is CEO Dylan Walker seeing someone new? Ex-wife remains silent amid affair rumors. Brittany was invited to interviews. A jewelry brand signed her as their new ambassador, ironically the same brand sponsoring Dylan's IPO event. I said nothing. So did Dylan. We didn't need to defend ourselves. Words at that point would have only made us look guilty in the eyes of a public that feeds on scandal. I've invested in over 40 startups. One thing I've learned: when a rumor spreads too fast, let it collapse under its own weight. And Brittany? She was already tightening the rope around her neck loop by loop with every smug little caption. I thought she'd stop at vague captions and cropped photos. But no, Brittany started to believe she was the main character. She hired a stylist, revamped her wardrobe, and began attending networking events in tech and venture capital circles. On her social media bio, she changed her title to future wife of a visionary CEO. No more subtlety, no more filters. Then one morning, I received an email from the PR lead at Walker Tech, Dylan's company. "Eleanor, have you seen Brittany's latest? She just claimed she's the inspirational co-founder of Walker Tech on Instagram. We're being flooded with media inquiries. Cartier's brand manager called already." I didn't respond emotionally. I replied with a single line: "Do not engage. She's climbing too high too fast." But things escalated. A week later, Brittany publicly declared she was strategically advising a major investment deal between Walker Tech and a rising AI startup. She even tweeted, "We're building the next big thing." Couple. That builds together. What Brittany didn't know, that AI company she was flaunting was a subsidiary of the Lancaster Group, hidden behind two layers of holding companies, of course. I had personally approved the acquisition roadmap months earlier, part of a delicate billion-dollar merger plan with a South Korean tech giant. And now, because of Brittany's loud ambitions, she'd unknowingly walked into the middle of it, becoming the one variable investors couldn't trust. That evening, I met Dylan in our penthouse. He stood at the window staring at the sleepless city below. I asked, "Do you trust me?" He didn't turn around. He simply said, "I've always stood behind you. People just never noticed." I nodded. We're not the kind of couple that needs to prove anything. Not with hands held. Not with selfies. Just a glance. One decision. And I had made mine. The next morning, I sent a message to Lancaster Group's internal investment board: suspend all merger discussions with AI tech until Brittany Chase is no longer referenced in any public-facing communication. An hour later, the AI company's stock dropped 12%. By noon, Brittany's name had been wiped from the Cartier campaign. And by evening, a finance headline read, "Scandal over fake executive title threatens billion-dollar tech deal." The storm wasn't over, but the sky had started to shift. Everything started slipping through her fingers, and I didn't have to lay a finger on Brittany. After the first article broke about her fabricated credentials, doubt spread like wildfire across the investment world. AI Tech's venture partners began raising concerns about transparency. Financial journalists started digging into Brittany's so-called rise from a short-term assistant to inspirational co-founder. Then came the leak. A series of internal emails surfaced. In one, Brittany had written to WalkerTech's PR department demanding they include her in the IPO event's official personnel roster. The final line was chilling. "Without me, Dylan wouldn't have come this far. I deserve to stand next to him on that stage." The email went viral. Social media erupted. Investors flooded Dylan's board with urgent demands: clarify Brittany Chase's involvement with WalkerTech before IPO. For any company on the verge of going public, that kind of emotional volatility is a loaded gun. WalkerTech's projected valuation started shaking. Bloomberg analysts flagged the situation as a significant reputational risk. Dylan said nothing, just as we'd agreed. And I did what any composed, strategic woman does in the midst of a storm I didn't explain. I set precedent. I called the CFO of Lancaster Group and instructed him to redirect media funds from one of our subsidiaries to sponsor a high-profile global finance forum set to take place days before the IPO. The title of the panel: Fabricated Personal Brands and Their Real-World Cost in Million-Dollar Deals. A subtle move, but unmistakable. Brittany became the poster child. At the event, when her face flashed on the presentation screen labeled "A Case Study in False Influence," the audience fell silent. I sat in the back row. No one knew who I was, but I saw her Brittany standing just off stage, eyes brimming, being asked to leave the VIP section. That afternoon, Cartier officially pulled her brand deal. Others followed. It was the first fracture. That night, Dylan came home. He placed his keys on the table, unbuttoned his collar. I looked at him and asked softly, "Everything okay?" He smiled faintly. "It is now. She's no longer on the IPO guest list." I nodded. Everything was back in place. But I knew Brittany wasn't the kind to disappear quietly, and I was right. 3 days later, she returned, not with captions this time, but with tears. In a live stream watched by over 500,000 people, Brittany sobbed, claiming she was bullied, blacklisted, and punished just for loving the wrong person. The internet split in half. Some pitied her. Others mocked her. I watched from my penthouse sipping tea. The game wasn't over. And I hadn't even started playing for real. Her bare-faced, puffy-eyed voice trembling like someone recovering from heartbreak. With soft piano music in the background, she broke down in tears and said, "I loved him with everything I had, and in return, I was crushed by power." I don't come from money. I have no connections. I'm just a girl who fell in love with the wrong man. The hashtag Trollard Justice for Britney spread like wildfire. Short clips of her crying went viral. And in an instant, Britney was no longer the girl who chased a CEO, she was the victim of a ruthless elite machine. The online media latched on. They began spinning a new narrative: Eleanor Lancaster, the silent, icy woman who destroys whoever gets near her husband. The mysterious heiress pulling strings behind every billion-dollar company. The one who erases threats without saying a word. I'd grown used to twisted stories. But this time, it was personal. Some articles even went further, digging into old funding rounds between me and Dylan, asking, is Dylan Walker, the CEO headed for IPO, just a puppet? How much of his success is really his own? Worse still this time, Dylan was the one taking the hit. A major outlet implied that his entire self-made image was manufactured by me. They called him a decent engineer with no real leadership and a placeholder CEO appointed by marriage. Investors began to waver. Emails poured in from major funds. Some wanted the board to reassess Dylan's qualifications before IPO day. He didn't say it aloud, but I saw it in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was pain. Not because of me, but because the world was so quick to dismiss everything he'd worked for. That evening, as I placed a glass of water on his desk, he looked up and asked, "Am I just a burden to you?" I met his gaze and answered softly, "You're the one part of my life I never calculated." He said nothing, just reached out and held my hand. It was quiet, but firm. The kind of grip that says no matter how they twist the story, we're still on the same side. I knew if we stayed silent, Dylan's name would continue to be dragged through the mud. The IPO would suffer. But if I stepped in again, Britney would play the same card: the crying girl crushed by the system. We were caught between two blades. And this time, I knew silence wouldn't be enough. That night, as the city slowly fell asleep, Dylan and I sat together in the warm glow of a single lamp. No more frantic messages, no clatter of keyboards, just the two of us face to face. He looked up, eyes meeting mine. "What do you want to do?" I held his gaze for a long moment and answered slowly. Silence is often the highest form of contempt. But this time, we need a stage. I'd built a life behind the scenes. I was comfortable in the dark. But I also knew if you don't step into the light when it matters, someone else will rewrite your story for you. I called Harper Lancaster Group's Strategic Communications Director. I'll attend the National Finance Gala. Not as someone's wife, as myself. 3 days later, the media went wild. Eleanor Lancaster, the enigma of the investment world, set to appear publicly for the first time at the year's biggest financial event. The event was held in New York. A red carpet stretched from the hotel lobby to the main hall. CEOs, founders, investors, media, they were all there. I stepped out of the car in a white tailored suit. No jewelry, no accessories. Just a small lapel pin, the logo of the fashion magazine I founded. All eyes turned. But I wasn't there to prove anything. I was there to end something. As I entered the hall, the host hesitated slightly before announcing, "Please welcome." A woman whose name has rarely appeared in the press yet has quietly moved behind more than 50 of the largest investment deals in the last 5 years. CEO of Lancaster Group, global investment strategist, and wife of Dylan Walker, the man now under fire as the world questions if he ever truly earned his place. I stepped onto the stage. In the audience, I saw Dylan, his gaze steady, unwavering. He didn't need to ask what I was going to say. He knew I only spoke when it mattered. And tonight, it mattered. I began. "I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to speak the truth. That a woman can invest lead and love without being forced to choose one over the others. That I invested in Dylan not to control him, but because I believed in his vision before anyone else did. I didn't mention Brittany. I didn't have to. The smart ones already knew I didn't need to destroy her. She had done that all by herself. I ended with one line: I don't need the spotlight, but I won't let anyone stand under it by dragging down the man I love. The applause wasn't loud, it was deep, respectful, earned. I had just stepped off the stage. The lights hadn't fully dimmed yet, and the applause still echoed faintly from the back rows, but it wasn't loud or chaotic like most galas. It was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes when the truth finally finds its rightful place. I passed by Dylan. He didn't speak, just gently touched my arm the way you nod without needing words. We didn't need a conversation. Alignment between us had never needed an audience. That's when I saw her, Brittany. She stood near the media VIP section, still in that deep red gown, perfectly tailored, her hair curled in soft waves, her makeup flawless, but her smile gone, her eyes empty. She stood there, like a shadow of herself. Because in that moment she realized something she hadn't understood until now. She thought this was a game of love, but it never was. This was a matter of power, of position, of truth. And all she had were suggestive captions and tearful live streams. I walked past her without stopping, not out of disdain, but because there was nothing to say to someone who thought that standing next to a powerful man somehow made her powerful too. I walked into the back corridor. Behind me, the room murmured, not about Brittany. They were talking about Lancaster, about the deals I had orchestrated quietly, about the woman who stepped into the light without having to scream her name. Dylan later took the stage for a brief closing address, but instead of speaking about his IPO or projections, he began with this: I know everyone's been curious about my story, but tonight I don't want to talk about me. He paused, looked at me. I want to acknowledge someone who believed in me before I believed in myself. And if I've made it here, it's because of her. Not because she handed me power, but because she never took it from me. Applause broke out again. This time, Brittany wasn't in the crowd. She had already left quietly, without cameras, without a single image left behind. And I knew that was the end. No announcements needed. No new scandal. Just the truth spoken at the right time, cleaning up everything false. That night, as Dylan and I left the venue, no one stopped us for photos. No press chased us down. Because everything had already been said. I didn't need to shout who I was. My husband didn't need to defend who he loved. And the other woman, she had nothing left to flaunt but a script from a play that had already closed. After the gala, everything began to unravel like a domino effect, only this time I didn't have to lift a finger. Brittany's brand deals were terminated across the board. The companies that once touted her as a symbol of female resilience in the face of power suddenly went silent. They didn't announce their reasons publicly, but I knew. In the real world, trust is the rarest currency, and Brittany had spent hers recklessly. Then came the second blow, not from gossip columns, but from an official federal press release: Brittany Chase under investigation for falsifying documents in commercial contracts, causing financial harm to at least 3 companies. I wasn't surprised. Anything built on lies eventually collapses. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. As for Dylan, the board had wavered briefly under the weight of the media storm, but shortly after the gala, I quietly transferred a portion of equity via one of our affiliated entities into his investment fund, timed precisely at the moment they needed reassurance. I didn't do it to save him. Dylan never needed saving. I did it to send a message to the board. This man, misunderstood, attacked, still had someone who believed in him completely. Dylan retained his role as CEO, and from being dismissed as a puppet, he gradually earned genuine respect from the shareholders. Not because he was my husband, but because he never lowered his head even when the world told him he should. As for me, I agreed to just one interview. No flashing lights, no elaborate setup, Just a simple camera, soft lighting, and one question, Eleanor, if you could say one thing about everything that happened, what would it be? I looked directly at the lens and said, I've never wanted to be a queen, but I won't allow anyone to crown themselves ruler of a castle I built. No theatrics, no malice, just the truth. I never wanted the spotlight. But if someone tries to climb by stepping on everything I've built, I'll make sure they never forget who laid the first stone. And finally, I want to say that we live in a world where the loudest voice often gets to tell the story, but not every story told is the truth, and not everyone who speaks first is right. It took me years to understand something so simple. Never judge someone based on a post, a photo, or a headline written in haste, because some people choose to live quietly, not out of weakness, but because they're too busy controlling everything behind the scenes. I never needed to climb a stage to prove my worth. I never fought for the spotlight. I simply stood where I had already built and waited for the truth to do its work. Some choose to draw attention with tears. I chose to end things with action. Because in the end, if you truly have strength, you don't need to shout to be heard. You just have to stand still, and they'll turn around to see you. A woman doesn't need to prove her position through volume. She only needs to hold her ground while everything else is falling apart.